Covenant, covenant. Who's got the covenant? Who's got the real covenant? Is your covenant real? Is my covenant real? Is someone else's covenant real? Who's got the covenant? Who's got the real covenant? Does anyone have the real covenant? Does anyone know what covenant actually is? Hi, I'm Mike Shevack. Welcome to GODSEARCH. Today, we're going to talk about covenant. You probably guessed that already. This is podcast 21. Now, the past 20 God searches, if you've been listening very carefully, what I've been trying to do is create a kind of structure to thinking so that we could actually have an authentic religious conversation. Religious, the R word. People don't want to use it. They want to use the S word for spirituality because it's easier. They don't want the rules and the regulations of religion. They don't want people controlling them, especially sexually. It's very complex in this era, not because there's anything that's bad. This is an era of freedom. No else at any other time in human existence has there been so much individuality and so much ability to express yourself and be yourself and experiment. That's why we're having religious difficulties and why religions that are mainstream, that are not really dealing with heavily reinforced traditional or conservative party lines, are floundering. It's because we have the freedom to ask the questions. We have those freedoms. Now, the past 20 podcasts, I've been building a structure. We started in podcast 1 with the most important concept that you must have if you're going to enter into an authentic God search. And that principle was non-idolatry. It's very ancient, 4,000 years old. The basic idea is no human concept created by any mere human being. I'm saying that out of respect to those Christians and other people who believe God can be an actual human being. I'm respecting that. But no mere human being can possibly enunciate in a human word or a human concept what is the totality of God. And if you say that you can, you violate the principle of non-idolatry. Non-idolatry. It's an ancient thing. When people in years and years and years and years ago used to worship trees, or they used to worship the sun or the wind. In rabbinic literature, you even have people who are defecating, making a doo-doo. It's a great word, defecating, making a doo-doo on a stick. And that's a worship to a god named Baal Peor. I mean, you have people who are taking the forms of human experience that we witness with our senses, and they are interpreting those things as gods, which we will talk about even more, because even though it sounds kind of stupid, there is knowledge in that idea. It's just, as we spoke about much later, it's out of context. So that was our first lesson in podcast number 1, and we carried through certain organized processes of thinking. So we are ready, we're really ready right now to discuss covenant. Now, I'll tell you, the way covenant has been taught up till now, it's enough to drive you insane if it didn't drive you insane. And it has driven so many people and so many nations insane that maybe it's because the notion is insane, but it isn't. It isn't. When you are properly taught what covenant actually is, it's miraculous. It's miraculous. It's sublime. It's life transformative. Now, it sounds like an old-fashioned religious term, but it's not. It's an actual living, breathing God experience. God experience. Because remember, as we talk about here on GODSEARCH, we don't know who God actually is, or we declare ourselves to be idolaters, which we're not doing. but we can have an experience called God. And that experience is something that I can have, you can have, other people can have. And we can compare notes and we can describe similar phenomenon taking place. And there is a kind of objectivity that becomes known between people. This is experienced in houses of worship, synagogues, or churches. And eventually, I believe in the future, we will double blind test the experiences and they will become science, a spiritual science, which is really what covenant is about. For the time being, it's going to begin with anecdotal experiences, your experience, mine, ours together, and we can expand beyond that, right? So when we speak of covenant here on GODSEARCH, we're talking about a spiritual experience that is called God. Now, as we said earlier at the way beginning, God has three, shall we say, components to the nature of this experience called God. One is truth, all right? The truth is substantial, meaning I can feel love in my heart. I can feel the texture of my skin. It's substantial. It's built into our experience of the materiality of the substance of life. Okay. And there sometimes is in our theologies a kind of propositional truth, a kind of logical truth in trying to explain this in a logical way. So there, God has an aspect of truth in the Hebrew Bible for Christians, the Old Testament. God is described in Exodus 34, I think it's verse 7, as Rav Emet, abundant in truth. Truth is not something that's up for debate. You know, validity is, but truth is not. It just exists, but we can't prove it to exist. You can't prove it, but there isn't a scientific experiment that is ever done that does not assume truth to exist, even if you can't prove it. There is also another aspect called unity, where we begin to notice there is an integration and a synchronization that takes place, that things which we would normally imagine are separate entities, that they are kind of coordinated, syncretized, harmonized. And there is a fabric, we notice there's a fabric to reality that is whole. It's more than a whole. Whole is composed of parts. It's a unity, which you can't. That's another thing that's impossible to describe what a unity is, except to saying it's the all-inclusive or the exclusively all-inclusive. It's a unity. And the other aspect to the experience called God is causality. We are creative beings. As the experience of God is creative, it is therefore cause and effect. It is sowing and reaping. It is knocking on doors and opening doors. It is a creative process, which is an interaction between us as individuals, as we see ourselves in our selfness as proper individuals, with what we think is the reality outside of us. And we notice that although we feel somewhat distinct or separate from that reality, increasingly, as you get on your GODSEARCH, you're going to notice that we're distinct, but we're hardly separate. Well, let's put it this way. We may be separate, but we're not apart. Well, let's put it another way. We may be apart, but we're not apart. We're intimately, deeply connected in truth and unity and causality. And when you go on a GODSEARCH with the purpose of making this kind of relationship personal, meaning you experience it and you experience more of it, then you will notice that you will experience what we commonly call as good. Now, academics may sit around and debate it, but, you know, God is a good contraction for the word good, concentrated good, concentrated, distilled good. Now, unless your desire is to sow and reap evil, to just cause pain and suffering to other people, your experience of is going to be good. And even if you are that kind of twisted person that wants to cause suffering, whose delight it is to create suffering, even that is a form of your personal experience of good. I'm not recommending it. I am not endorsing it at all. We will talk about the difference between spirituality and morality as we continue. Everything on a God search is your experience of truth and unity and causality as you choose it and as you believe it and as you experience it. And here is where the so-called New Age interacts and dovetails with the so-called Old Age, where spirituality in a modern psychological context merges with religion in an ancient spiritual bio-spiritual, I don't even know the word, context. So this brings us to covenant. Covenant, as it's been taught, it's a club. Let's join the club. Say these words. Okay, now you're in the club. Cut off a piece of skin from your more intimate members, and bang, you validate the fact that you are in the covenant. Now just do what everyone says, and now you're in the covenant, and the covenant is in you, and you're part of it, and that's it. And now you have what looks like religious wars that have been going on for centuries. And that's what most people think is covenant. And if that is your idea of covenant, well, of course, you're not going to go to houses of worship anymore. Of course, you're going to look for something that's more vibrant and more spiritually alive, because that notion of covenant is dead. It's lifeless. That doesn't mean it's missing knowledge. It is filled with vibrant spiritual knowledge. It's lost its potency. It's lost its vibrancy. And so we don't really understand what covenant is anymore. We don't understand it. Well, in the ancient world, covenant, let's go back to the basics. The word in Hebrew is brit. The word covenant was a kind of mutual non-aggression pact between different kings. And I think it's in the book of Hosea, you'll see that. And a mutual non-aggression pact. One king decides to meet with another king. They form a kind of a treaty between them that say, hey, I'm not going to mess you up. You're not going to mess me up. And we can get along together in peace. It's kind of a contract of mutual survival and mutual prosperity. And over time, that concept began to expand. It expands from one king to two kings, to three kings, to four kings. It includes nations. It goes inward instead of being projected into the political sphere. It goes introjected harmoniously into the inner sphere of our life. So we make covenants with different aspects of ourselves. For instance, if you're married, okay, and you're a musician that gets on the road and you're gone like months and months and months. Well, how are you married and have children and at the same time constantly out of your house? There is a kind of covenant that you have to make between these two aspects of you. All of us have these kind of conflicts on the inside of us, these mind cracks that make it impossible to experience unity and a relationship structure that is good. And our ability to cause and affect this gets very hampered by these contradictions. And because of that, we do not experience the truth about this world. This world is highly ordered. It is an order or commandment, or an order, pun intended, a commandment by God is an order All right. If you look at it personally, it's like Santa Claus telling you right and wrong. If you look at it impersonally, instead of a commandment, we can use the term order, which can also be a personal commandment, but it can also be an impersonal way that something is organized. Well, this world is highly organized, and it is designed to reveal to you truth, unity, causality, a relationship which is of increasing goodness and harmony outwardly and inwardly. Outwardly and inwardly. And that is the experience, which is the doorway to the mystery and sublime beauty of God. That's the doorway. It's alignment. Alignment. The word covenant in Hebrew, which comes from brit, which is like circumcision, it's the same word. When it's translated into Latin, is often translated as an alliance, as alliance, or an alignment. Alignment is what we are talking about here on God Search. Can you create an alignment between your mind and your heart so that they're not at war? Can you create an alignment between your mind and the mind of someone you love and their heart and your heart? That's harder. That's an exponential problem. You have two different foci, I don't know how to pronounce that. I've only read the word. And you then have two in the other person. You have two to the square power relationships. Can you form an alignment between your breathing and your bodily functions and how your mind works and thinks when you have thoughts that are disturbing and your breathing accelerates? Are the disturbances real? Meaning they're there to help you survive, or are they commonly called what's neurotic? How do we form an alignment between our mind and our heart, our morality, which we'll discuss, and other people, and our sexuality? These days, that's quite a complicated thing because the box of explicit traditional marriage and traditionalism is swollen with all sorts of new versions of it and new complications because this is a post-feminist era, post-1970s, and it is a birth control era, right? It is also has doesn't have as many gender dependent roles. I mean, if you sit at a computer, a male considered a computer, a female considered a computer, and anyone considered a computer who might be in between the two. So our roles and our technology are less gender specific, meaning men tend to be more muscularly on their big muscles and tended to do that kind of labor, whereas we know the labor that every woman does whenever she gives birth to a child, that's quite a lot of labor, and it would rip a man apart if he did it. So we are dealing in an era where everything is confusing. And when you go back and you read scripture, which has a very traditional point of view, we can't put the pieces of our contemporary time together with the traditional viewpoint. And there's a discord. And the minute there's a discord, the experience of truth and unity and causality and goodness collapses. So our very turmoil about trying to understand how to form alignments with all the various facets of ourselves, well, the more problems we have with trying to make that alignment, the more complications we have because our society is changing and there are so many more options and freedoms that have to be considered since this is a free culture, where so-called free will is respected as a right endowed by the creator. Well, what can I tell you? To understand the dynamics of covenant in a new way, in the common era of 2025, it takes a little gymnastics, and I do apologize if I heavy-handed 20 preliminary lessons, but Continuing from here on in would have been impossible unless I established some kind of ground rules. So do go back and try to binge watch them all and regather some of the information one time, two times, so that you can be as up to date as possible. Don't forget, by the way, go to yourgodsearch.com, strike up a conversation. There are some books there that might be able to help you slow the lesson down and allow you to think it through, because reading is a much more thoughtful media than podcasts. So how do we begin covenant? Well, we begin by caution. And we've already done that in the past 12 podcasts. Without knowing how to make an alignment that would produce the covenantal experience, which is the doorway to the experience called God, without knowing how to do it, we do have to kind of prepare and have some rules and regulations, not unlike any parent, if you don't mind, helping any child learn how to tie their shoelaces or walk across the street, and what to do with their gum after they've chewed it. It doesn't go under the tables, and it doesn't go in unusual places. So we began with certain practical rules, which we called value priorities, and we had others which were called relationship priorities. These are general rules that if you make your decisions and your thinking processes on how you want to go about life according to them in their correct order, you will more or less produce and have an experience of good or God. You will more or less have it. You will have to tune it up. It's a science that requires artfulness, but that takes practice. But nonetheless, the guidelines are very valuable. If I give you the guideline, thou shalt not steal, which is pretty ancient, you'll have to figure out some of the nuances around it as well. If you're hungry and there's nothing around and you're going to die, you might have to bend the rules a little bit. But nonetheless, these rules are very valuable as basic, simple guidelines. Please go back and review them. Value priority number 1 to 6, health, peace, freedom, the expression of your full potential, prosperity. Okay, I'm missing one. Health, peace, freedom, wisdom, the expression of your full potential, all right, and prosperity for yourself, another, all others, future generations, all life and creation. And number 6 is continual improvement in everything you do. If you begin to organize your life and your thinking processes according to value priorities and relationship priorities, you will increasingly experience good. And these little rules and regulations, as you continue the God experience, will bear themselves out. They will bear themselves out, and they will prove to you that they're useful. You establish them, and you'll see that they work with the design of this world. The design of this world meaning its order, how life works for good. So knowing these guidelines, we can get a jump on what covenant is and begin to experience it, right? The most important thing about covenant is that there are a multitude of levels that are going to be harmonized and come into alignment, right? These are very important. We've discussed them somewhat, but now we're going to go a little bit deeper, because we're going deeper into the experience of God now that we have some basic learning in place and some basic guidelines to prevent us from making some mistakes. There is a material level to covenant. Material meaning carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, the stuff that we're made of, the planet, that we're made of, the rocks, the elements. Okay, these are material. That is part of who we are. We are composed of that. Okay, And we are continuously acting on that and reshaping the material consciousness, which is what we call the planet. And we have to come into alignment with that. Otherwise, what happens is we will run into problems where material problems will surface and cause a disturbance in our lives, and we'll experience less than the good that we could do. There is also ascending from this, going higher. There is also a natural consciousness. A natural consciousness can include the material because we're made of it, but it has something else. There's a vegetative force, a kind of spirit that is in plants. It's not as active as the spirit in animal life. But it is conscious. It does have this ability to increase auxins on the side of the stem that doesn't face the sun, so the plant begins to rotate towards the sun. There is an interaction of the plant with its environment that has a consciousness to it, though we tend to not want to think about a plant as being conscious. It has a vegetative consciousness, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about comas and abortion in greater detail, about vegetative consciousnesses as opposed to animal consciousnesses. It's part of the very deep and disgraceful discussion around that subject matter. Then there is part of the natural consciousness, which is animal consciousness, where the animal begins to have a sense of likes and dislikes and becomes much more active as a kind of separated being. Cows, horses, earthworms are very, very much more basic than that, where they have their own individual kind of behaviors, not a true individuality, but it's beginning to surface. You get the beginning of natural consciousness. It progresses to increasing emphasis on the head, okay? The cephalization, as the great Teilhard de Chardin in his book, which is an extraordinary synthesis of evolution and Catholicism, discussed. There is an increase tendency to emphasize the head, the head of the human being, the sun over the planets, the tonic structure of music. These are very similar things. White is in color, and all the colors beneath it, dough and all the others, which dough repeats itself. These are structures that begin to develop as you go from a material consciousness to a natural consciousness. And then as you get to the super or the supra-natural consciousness, like a chimpanzee or certain birds where you can make up twigs, you begin to get the tiny beginnings of freedom and technology. Beyond that, you get more advanced technologies, such as the human being, and I am perfectly certain we've got some friends out in the universe somewhere. And we demonstrate a supernatural consciousness. We can create what is supernatural beyond nature, like the computer I am on. Nature doesn't make it without us. A bird or a chimp may make a twig, but the twig already exists in nature. The computer doesn't. Only its potential does. So we are supernatural consciousness. And with the supernatural consciousness, we begin to reach out, okay, on a much higher level of supernaturalness to become aware that there's a sun and it's an entity, okay, that there are planets, they are entities, and that these are locations and we can travel there. So we begin the process of elevating ourselves to higher levels of alignment or covenant. So until we get to what you can't even define very well, which we'll call the transnatural consciousness, right? Which is that realm we might identify with God. And within that, we would identify a meta consciousness, where how that entity, which is God within itself, creates a universe which may never have existed before and has a creative act. So going backwards from the top down now, we'll have a transnatural consciousness, which is God, a meta consciousness, which allows you to create a universe, a higher supernatural with a capital N consciousness of cosmic order, a supernatural consciousness, which is the beginnings and rudiments of technology and human awakening. You'll have a supranatural consciousness, which is the ability to interface with earthly nature and create things out of it, reusing it and creating nests like birds and, little, chopsticks to get ants like chimps do. And then we keep going, we descend to a natural consciousness of other animals that are more advanced, a natural consciousness which is more vegetative and more responsive to the environment with little individuality, until we get to material consciousness, which is the matter that everything is composed of, that we call matter, which is far more complex than just materia, as we now know in an era of quantum physics. All of these things in the year 2025 are levels of reality that come into play in covenant. And the absolute excitement of entering into a covenantal alignment, it's a little bit redundant, but it's fine, a covenantal alignment, is that all of these different aspects of reality that weave inside of us, sometimes they conflict, sometimes they don't harmonize. And we have to learn how to bring them all together and experience goodness and more goodness and more goodness and more goodness beyond that. Okay? And that's our role as being human beings, as being leaders, as being stewards of this planet. So that's an introduction to covenant. We're going to get into basics and start, building a dynamic life where you can experience the absolute miracle of the every single day alignment of these unusual forces that are all around you and from which you yourself are actually constructed. In the meantime, do review the value priorities, do review the relationship priorities, get familiar with them, employ them in your life on all scales, individual and business, in schools. The more you employ them, the more they build force, and the more they create a kind of cushion and a buffer against really unpleasant and unfortunate circumstances that can happen to you, which are not necessary, but they do happen. When they happen, they're part of the learning experience. So we're going to continue the alignment next week. That's covenant. Covenant begins with alignment. Covenant is the most magnificent spiritual experience. It is the spiritual experience which is the beginning and was the beginning of what became religion. And what we're going to do on GODSEARCH is we're going to put back the spiritual foundation. And for those of you who need it, you're going to uncover God, as we say, you're going to discover God. And for those who need it, you're going to recover God if you had a bad experience or your religion became so encrusted and so spiritually empty that you had to go somewhere else to find it. Well, come again next week and we'll continue. This is Michael Shevack for GODSEARCH. Keep searching for God. If you're alive, you're already on a GODSEARCH. You might as well learn how it works. See you next time.